Sorry, ma'am, this is a black tie event. Your attire isn't appropriate, and I don't see your name on the guest list, the young event coordinator said, his voice dripping with condescension. He blocked the museum entrance, effectively barring the elderly woman in a faded military jacket. Elizabeth Reynolds, known as Beth to the few who knew her well, just nodded slightly, her blue eyes betraying a flicker of hurt before settling back into their usual quiet resignation. There must be a mistake, she murmured, clutching a worn envelope containing her invitation. Beth was 70 years old, though the lines on her face and the slight stiffness in her movements told a story of a much harder journey. She lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town, subsisting on her military pension and occasionally tutoring neighborhood children in mathematics. She rarely spoke of her past, preferring the quiet company of her memories to the judgment of strangers. Her prized possession wasn't displayed on any wall. It was a small collection of medals kept in a cedar box beside her bed, alongside folded letters with fading ink and photographs of young soldiers who never grew old. She spent her Thursday afternoons volunteering at the VA hospital, not talking but listening, a skill she'd honed over decades of military service. Tonight was different. The City Museum was hosting its annual Night of Heroes Gala, honoring veterans and unveiling a new exhibit dedicated to Korean War, a conflict that shaped Beth's youth in profound ways. She hadn't planned on attending, finding such public displays uncomfortable, but she'd received a personal handwritten invitation from the exhibit's curator, Dr. Eris Thorne, an academic with whom Beth had reluctantly shared some carefully selected memories months ago for research purposes. The invitation felt like an obligation, a duty to the ghosts of her past. So she put on her best slacks, a crisp white blouse, and her old but well-maintained dress blue jacket, the closest thing she owned to formal wear. The jacket, though decades old, was meticulously cared for, with visible signs of repair around the cuffs. The entrance hall pulsed with wealth and influence. Tuxedos and glittering evening gowns moved through the space like pieces on a chessboard. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. Beth felt immediately out of place, the worn fabric of her jacket absorbing the ambient light rather than reflecting it like the surrounding silk and jewels. She approached the check-in table, staffed by the sharply dressed young man whose name tag read Jason, event coordinator. Jason's eyes swept over Beth, taking in the jacket, the slightly worn look, the age, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly, shifting from welcoming host to gatekeeper. Beth Reynolds stood quietly to the side, watching as others were welcomed with warm smiles and effusive greetings. Her military training had taught her to observe, to assess situations with cool detachment. But tonight, a familiar heaviness settled in her chest, the weight of being invisible in a room full of people. She joined the Army in 1970, one of the few women to pursue a military career during that era. Starting as a nurse, she'd risen through the ranks through sheer determination and exceptional skill, eventually becoming one of the first female colonels in the medical corps. Her service had spanned multiple conflicts, from the tail end of Vietnam to operations in the Middle East. She'd saved countless lives, pioneered trauma protocols still in use today, and broken barriers for women in military medicine. But none of that was evident in her appearance tonight. Age had softened her once sharp features. Silver had replaced the brown in her hair, and civilian life had gradually erased the visible signs of her military bearing, to all but the most trained eyes. The worn blue jacket she wore had its own story. She'd received it upon her promotion to colonel, had worn it to the White House when receiving a commendation from the president. The jacket had traveled with her through 3 decades of service, witnessing both her triumphs and the most harrowing moments of her career. Tonight, wearing it felt like bringing all those men and women whose lives she'd touched with her into this rarefied space. Beth glanced down at the invitation in her hand. Dr. Thorne had been adamant that her perspective was vital, that the exhibit was dedicated to preserving the authentic experiences of those who served. Your insights changed my entire understanding of field medicine during the conflict, he'd written. Now she wondered if she'd misunderstood her role. Perhaps she was meant to contribute from the shadows, not actually attend among the glittering donors and dignitaries. From her position near the velvet rope cordoning off the main gallery, she could see glimpses of the new exhibit inside. black and white photographs blown up large, display cases with artifacts, the low murmur of appreciative guests guided by docents. One photograph, partially visible, showed medical personnel working frantically in a MASH unit. Beth recognized the chaos, the determination on those young faces. She felt a pang, a deep ache of memory that momentarily overshadowed the sting of the coordinator's dismissal. She wasn't angry, not really. She was mostly just tired. Tired of being judged by appearances. Tired of a world that valued polish over substance. Tired of carrying memories that felt increasingly alien in the modern age. She stood there silently, a ghost at the feast, invisible to the glittering crowd that flowed past her. Some cast curious glances her way, wondering why the elderly woman, in the dated military jacket, was loitering near the entrance. Others didn't register her presence at all, too absorbed in their conversations and champagne. A younger museum staffer, perhaps an intern, judging by her nervous energy, noticed Beth standing there and approached tentatively. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you waiting for someone? Can I help you find anything?" she asked kindly, her eyes lacking the judgment Beth had seen in Jason's. Beth offered her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, dear. I was invited by Dr. Thorne, but my attire isn't quite right for the evening, it seems." The intern glanced toward Jason, then back at Beth, lowering her voice. "Mr. Carter at the check-in can be a bit strict. Dr. Thorne mentioned he was expecting a special guest tonight, someone very important to Korean War exhibit. Could that be you?" Before Beth could respond, Jason noticed the intern talking to her and strode over, his expression sharp. "Maria, are you bothering this lady? She's already been informed she cannot enter due to the dress code. Please return to your station." The intern flushed. "I was just asking if she needed assistance, Jason. Her assistance is not required inside the gala." Jason snapped, then turned back to Beth, his voice regaining its condescending edge. "Ma'am, I must insist you leave the lobby area now. If you loiter, I'll have to call security." Beth met Jason's gaze squarely this time, her quiet patience finally wearing thin. "I am waiting for Dr. Thorne, as requested. I am not loitering." Jason scoffed. "Dr. Thorne is currently occupied with our most distinguished guests. He won't be available to countermand museum policy for—" He waved a dismissive hand toward Beth's jacket. "This—" A couple nearby overheard the exchange, the woman whispering something to her companion, while casting a pitying glance at Beth. The humiliation was quiet but potent, wrapping around her like a cold draft. "Perhaps," Jason continued, his voice lower but still carrying to those nearby, "you've misunderstood the nature of your invitation. The research consultants aren't typically included in the gala portion of the evening." Beth's spine straightened almost imperceptibly, a reflexive military response to challenge. "I understand perfectly well what my invitation states, young man." It was quite clear. Jason's face hardened. "Security will escort you out if necessary. This is your final warning." Beth didn't move. Decades of standing her ground in military hospitals under bombardment had given her a different perspective on what constituted a genuine threat. Just as Jason spoke his final warning, the revolving glass doors at the main entrance spun rapidly, depositing several figures into the lobby. Two uniformed aides entered first, followed by a man whose presence immediately commanded the attention of everyone nearby. Tall, ramrod straight, wearing the immaculate dress uniform of a United States Army general, for silver stars gleaming on his epaulets, his chest a formidable array of colorful ribbons and medals. It was General Richard Hayes, legendary combat surgeon turned military commander and the gala's guest of honor. The general paused just inside the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the lobby, acknowledging the subtle nods and deferential looks from guests. His gaze swept past the check-in table, past the glittering crowd, and then stopped, locking onto the figure standing quietly by the velvet rope. General Hayes' professional, slightly distant expression dissolved instantly, replaced by one of stunned recognition, then warmth, and finally profound respect. He changed direction immediately, ignoring the museum director who was hurrying forward to greet him, ignoring Jason who had snapped to attention. He strode directly toward Beth Reynolds, his polished shoes clicking purposefully on the marble floor. The lobby seemed to hold its collective breath. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses hovered halfway to lips. All eyes followed the four-star general as he bypassed the official welcome to approach the poorly dressed elderly woman by the rope. Jason watched, bewildered, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The intern, Maria, gasped softly. Beth looked up as the general approached, a flicker of surprise crossing her own weathered features. She hadn't expected to see Richard Hayes here. They hadn't crossed paths in years, though they shared history forged in battlefield hospitals half a world away. General Hayes stopped directly in front of Beth, his posture radiating respect. He didn't offer a handshake immediately. Instead, with military precision, he executed a flawless salute. Colonel Reynolds, the general's voice resonated to the suddenly silent lobby, clear and strong. "It is an honor to see you here tonight, ma'am." Beth, caught off guard but with decades of ingrained discipline kicking in, slowly straightened her shoulders, standing taller than she had in years. She returned the salute, her hand perhaps trembling slightly, but the gesture firm. "General Hayes," Beth replied, her voice quiet but steady. "Good to see you, Richard." The general dropped the salute but kept his gaze locked on Beth, a genuine smile lighting up his stern features. "Beth, you old warrior. I heard you might be here, but I didn't dare hope. How are you?" Then, noticing Beth standing outside the main event area, his smile faded slightly, replaced by a puzzled frown. "What are you doing out here by the ropes, Colonel? Shouldn't you be inside, front and center? This whole exhibit features your MASH unit's innovations." The question hung in the air, directed at Beth, but implicitly demanding an answer from anyone within earshot. The museum director looked mortified. Jason, the coordinator, suddenly felt very, very cold, the earlier confidence draining from him like sand through an hourglass. Beth hesitated for a moment, glancing briefly at Jason, then back at the general. "Seems my jacket and I don't meet the dress code for the evening, Richard," she said simply without bitterness, just stating a fact. The general's eyes narrowed instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that seemed to lower the temperature in the immediate vicinity. He turned slowly, deliberately, his four-star gaze pinning Jason to the spot. "Did you," the general began, his voice dangerously quiet, "refuse entry to Colonel Elizabeth Reynolds?" Jason swallowed hard, his face paling. "General, sir, I was unaware of the lady's identity. She wasn't on the main list, and the attire, museum policy requires black tie." The general cut him off with a sharp, chopping gesture. "Policy? Attire?" He took a step closer to Jason, his voice rising but still controlled, laced with contempt. "Let me tell you about this woman's attire. The jacket she's wearing was with her through 2 wars. The woman wearing it saved more lives than you've probably met in your entire lifetime." He gestured back toward Beth. "This is Colonel Elizabeth Reynolds, former chief surgeon of the 8055th MASH Unit during Korea and later commanding officer of the 47th Combat Support Hospital in Vietnam. She was my first commanding officer when I was a green lieutenant fresh out of medical school. She taught me how to operate under artillery fire, how to prioritize when casualties overwhelmed us, how to lead when everyone around us was falling apart." The general's voice resonated with authority and raw emotion. She revolutionized battlefield triage protocols that are still taught today. She performed emergency surgery during the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge with nothing but a flashlight when the generators failed, saving 16 men who would have certainly died. He turned slightly, addressing the museum director, who looked ready to faint. "Did you know Colonel Reynolds personally advised Dr. Thorne on the accuracy of the MASH unit display? Did you know those surgical instruments in your central case were donated from her personal collection? Did you know she was one of the few female commanders in a combat zone during 2 separate wars?" The crowd murmured, stunned by the revelations. People who had earlier ignored Beth now stared at her with awe and dawning shame. Jason looked utterly crushed, speechless. General Hayes drew himself up to his full imposing height. His voice, no longer quiet, boomed across the opulent lobby, silencing every whisper, commanding every eye. "This museum," he declared, his words sharp as shrapnel, "dedicates tonight to honoring heroes. Yet its representatives have turned away a woman who embodies heroism more than anyone in this room. A woman whose courage and sacrifice are the very reason we can gather here freely tonight. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. His gaze swept over the stunned faces of the wealthy patrons, the nervous museum staff, and landed again on Jason, who seemed to shrink under the intensity. You honor history with exhibits, the general continued, his voice ringing with righteous anger. But you dishonor the people who made that history by judging them by the cut of their clothing rather than the content of their character. You care more about maintaining an image than recognizing true greatness when it stands humbly before you. He took a deep breath, his decision made, his authority absolute. As a guest of honor tonight and as a representative of the United States Army, I cannot in good conscience participate in an event that begins with such profound disrespect shown to one of its finest officers. He turned toward the entrance, his voice leaving no room for argument. This gala, he announced, each word a hammer blow, is officially over. The military delegation will withdraw immediately. I suggest the rest of you reflect on what truly constitutes honor before you attend another event like this. The shutdown was swift, decisive, and absolute. The honor guard previously standing near the entrance packed their colors and marched out. Other military personnel present began discreetly excusing themselves. The life seemed to drain from the party, the festive atmosphere evaporating under the weight of the general's condemnation. The museum director rushed forward, stammering apologies, begging the general to reconsider. But General Hayes ignored him, focusing solely on Beth. "Colonel," he said, his voice gentle now, "I believe there's an exhibit in there you more than anyone deserved to see properly." He offered Beth his arm. The gala, moments before a glittering affair, had imploded. The aftermath was immediate and chaotic within the museum walls, but profoundly quiet for Beth Reynolds as General Hayes escorted her away from the crumbling event. Jason, the coordinator, was being intensely questioned by a frantic museum director. News of the general shutting down the prestigious event spread to the remaining guests like wildfire, fueled by shocked whispers and urgent phone calls. The carefully curated evening of celebration had turned into a public relations nightmare. General Hayes led Beth not toward the exit, but toward the now sparsely populated main gallery, where the Korean War exhibit resided. Dr. Thorne, the curator, finally located them, his face etched with concern and deep apology. "Colonel Reynolds, General, I am mortified," Dr. Thorne stammered. "I just heard what happened at the entrance. Jason had no authority. I am so deeply sorry." Beth simply nodded, accepting the apology without comment. For the next hour, Beth Reynolds received a private tour of the exhibit, guided by the curator and flanked by the four-star general. They paused longest at the MASH unit display. Beth looked at the blown-up photographs, the surgical instruments she'd donated, the detailed recreation of a field hospital. She pointed out small details, corrected a caption softly, shared a brief, poignant memory triggered by a specific image. News of the incident hit local media almost immediately. Headlines the next morning read, "Gala disaster. Four-star general shuts down museum event over disrespect to war hero." The story highlighted the contrast between the gala's theme and the treatment Beth received. Jason was quietly dismissed from his position. The museum board issued a formal public apology to Colonel Reynolds and all veterans, announcing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff and a renewed commitment to accessibility. Beth, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, politely declined interview requests, but accepted the museum's apology. The incident sparked a wider conversation about how society treats its elderly veterans, particularly women who served when their participation was neither expected nor always welcomed. Weeks later, Beth sat in her small apartment, a cup of tea in hand, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. On her table lay several invitations, not to galas, but to speak at military academies, women's leadership conferences, and veterans groups. Her phone rang more often now, old colleagues reconnecting after seeing her name in the news. The Night of Heroes incident had become a reminder that true heroism often walks among us unrecognized, not in gleaming medals or formal attire, but in the quiet dignity of those who serve when called, regardless of the welcome they received. If you believe respect should be earned by character, not clothing, comment respect below.